Oh, Sagittarius. I'm Poetic Heretic, and this is your October 2018 astrology forecast. I will be going over what I consider to be the most important astrological events of the month of October for all Sagittarius people, sun, rising, and moon, and giving you my interpretation of them. So, without further ado, let us begin. In order to properly understand the astrology of October, we must first go back to the end of September, specifically September 28th at 2:27 p.m. Eastern Time, when we had the new moon in Libra in your 11th house opposite Chiron. So the new moon is the beginning of the lunar cycle, which lasts about 28 days, and thus it affects that entire time frame. So this new moon on September 28th is affecting almost the entirety of October, specifically up until October 27th when we have the next new moon. So this new moon took place in your 11th house. So this is the energy of new beginnings surrounding networking, the social group or groups in general, your friends, other people, but particularly other people in terms of groups and organizations and that sort of thing, as opposed to one-on-one interactions or something like that. That is not what this is about. This new moon and this lunar cycle is about your networking and working with other people, getting involved in group activities and that sort of thing. Now, it was opposite Chiron, wounded healer Chiron, and this part actually applies to everyone of every sign. Because it was opposite Chiron, we can also expect the healing of wounds to be a significant part of this lunar cycle, whether it's the healing of wounds in ourselves or someone else, or the healing of wounds in someone else that are a match to the wounds in ourselves in an attempt to heal those same kinds of wounds in ourselves. I hope that made sense. That's Chiron sort of oversimplified. So that's what we can expect with this current lunar cycle. On October 3rd at 4:14 a.m., Mercury exits Libra and enters Scorpio, thus going from your 11th to your 12th house. So in the first 2 days of October, Mercury finishes up its transit through your 11th house, which is a time where your mind is focused on the group and on working and stuff like that. However, Mercury in the 11th house can also be a time where you may come up with some unique and interesting ideas. So expect that to wrap itself up in the first 2 days of October. And then when Mercury enters your 12th house on October 3rd, in the early hours of October 3rd, now your mind is much more focused on private matters and is much more about reflecting on things and reflecting on the past, learning from the past. Or I guess anytime you reflect, it's probably going to be something in the past, or kind of has to be by definition. But you know what I mean. Learning from the past and that sort of thing. And I would say Mercury in the 12th may also stimulate your imagination, with the 12th house's association with things like dreams and the imagination. So that can be quite nice. And that Mercury in the 12th energy is effective October 3rd through the rest of the month. On October 4th at 12:21 a.m., Mars exits Virgo and enters Libra, going from your 10th to your 11th house. So in the first 3 days of October, Mars finishes up its transit through your 10th house, which is all about hard work and really distinguishing yourself in a business or career sense. It's a time where a lot of people may start their own businesses or become self-employed. But regardless, that's finishing itself up in the first 3 days of October. And then when Mars moves into your 11th, now the focus is on being a leader in a group and accomplishing your goals through the group or through community, through other people. So it's a time where, again, you're likely wanting to lead, to be a leader, but also be careful not to become too much about wanting to sort of bulldoze other people or letting your ego sort of run away with your power or influence over or around or regarding other people. That's one possible danger there. But yes, for the rest of October, October 4th onward, now you're prioritizing your involvement with the group, with networking, and you're likely to accomplish your goals through that activity. So, pretty exciting time. On October 8th at 1:05 p.m., Venus exits Libra and enters Scorpio, going from your 11th to your 12th house. So for the first 7.5 days, Venus transiting your 11th house, Venus finishes up transiting your 11th house, where Venus in the 11th is like, how do I put this? An enjoyment of, again, group activity, as we've been talking about with the 11th house. It's a time where you may find someone, or perhaps you found someone last month, since Venus has been transiting your 11th house for a number of weeks now, where you found someone with whom you entered into a romantic partnership through your involvement in some kind of group or networking or whatever. However, it might be a relationship that is a bit detached and a little less emotional if one is begun at this time when Venus is transiting your 11th house. But indeed, Venus is what we love, what we like, what we enjoy, what we want to indulge in. And the 11th house is, again, all about the group and networking and friends and community. So this is a time where you enjoy being involved in that kind of stuff. You're far more predisposed to it. However, on October 8th at 1:05 p.m., when Venus enters your 12th house, there's a shift in the energy. And now it's like you enjoy being alone. And because the 12th house is generally about aloneness, isolation, solitude. And because Venus also, again, talks about love and relationships, now it's like relationship matters may be much more happening in secret, maybe occurring behind closed doors. This also sometimes could be a time of endings. In fact, the 12th house being the last house before the new cycle begins. It may be a time where there are particular concerns with relationships, and maybe you just are thinking a lot about relationships in general, as a whole. And I would also say, with the 12th house's association with, again, the imagination and dreaming, as I mentioned earlier, it may also be a time where you're enjoying the imagination more, or even dreaming more, where you love contemplating the many possibilities that your mind or your imagination can come up with. So that can be quite nice. And again, that Venus in the 12th energy is from October 8th onward, rest of the month. On October 11th, Mercury enters its retrograde shadow in Scorpio, and that is your 12th house. So what do I mean by that? Mercury entering its retrograde shadow? Well, when Mercury goes retrograde, it's like a pendulum swing. So imagine Mercury going along the sky. Imagine my finger is Mercury, and it's just traveling along, and then it goes through its shadow, and then it actually goes retrograde, and then it goes through its shadow again. So That first pendulum swing is where it first enters its shadow. The second pendulum swing backwards is the actual retrograde. And then the third pendulum swing forwards again is it entering its shadow again. So, what happens when Mercury enters its shadow on October 11th this month is it begins to feel like Mercury is already retrograde. Now, some people think that this is the end of the world when Mercury goes retrograde. Some people think that you don't have to really worry about it at all as long as you're careful. I tend to take a middle of the road approach, saying that while I don't think it's the end of the world, I do think it should be respected, at least whenever possible. Meaning, I think that you should avoid beginning new things during a Mercury retrograde. You should be careful about communication, knowing that miscommunications can and do take place during Mercury retrogrades, usually far more often than when Mercury is not retrograde. And you should be careful when working with technology because technological malfunctions are more likely. You should even be careful when traveling, maybe even avoid traveling during a Mercury retrograde because Mercury is associated with travel, and there can be travel difficulties, or at least travel difficulties are usually far more likely during a Mercury retrograde. So do be aware of that indeed. But at the same time, if there's certain things that, you just have to do and it's extremely inconvenient, if not impossible, to not do them, then if you got to do them during Mercury retrograde, so be it. Just be extra careful. Now, that is taking place in your 12th house, as I mentioned earlier, with Mercury in your 12th house. So when a planet goes retrograde, you can think of it as the signal of that planet being amplified. You can think of it becoming more powerful. So what I already talked about earlier, on October 3rd, when Mercury enters your 12th house with, now your thoughts are turned towards private matters and it's all about reflecting and like learning from the past and stuff like that. Well, now on October 11th, you can just expect that to become even more intense. You can expect your mental activities surrounding those areas of life to become even more powerful, even more potent, even more active. So there you have it. On October 13th, we have the full moon in Aries, and that is your 5th house. But before we talk about that aspect of it, remember what I said earlier about the new moon in Libra, your 11th house, on September 28th, and how that's the energy of the entire current lunar cycle. Well, the full moon is where things come to a head. That is where that energy peaks. That is where things tend to happen. That's where the action is. So with the new moon being in your 11th house, you can expect 11th house matters to really come to a head, and you can expect to see those kinds of things really happen on the date of the full moon, October 13th. And again, 11th house, that is networking, the group, the community, your friends, and like wider social group, all of that sort of thing. So you can expect some intense activity surrounding all of that on October 13th. What you can also expect with the full moon itself being in your 5th house is 5th house activity. You can expect this full moon to be a lot of fun for you. So that's very good news. A lot of fun. The 5th house is all about fun. It's also about love and romance and sex. It's about gambling and risk taking. So with that, I would actually say, especially with the full moon being a time where things tend to get rather intense, be careful not to have, or how should I say this? Be careful not to indulge in a little too much risk taking on or around October 13th, the time of the full moon. Full moon combined with 5th house activity might have you wanting to party super hard until you end up in extreme trouble. Maybe you drink too much, or maybe you I don't know, people end up in fights and they get in trouble with the cops, and next thing they know, they're in jail for the next 24 hours or something, um, or worse, perhaps. Like, just be careful, is all I'm saying. Be careful that your fun doesn't get out of hand, because this is the full moon we're talking about. So, following that, you may have noticed this month that we seem to have this theme. Well, we do indeed have this theme of a lot of things going from your 11th to your 12th house. That is indeed the theme this month for Sagittarius. And for every sign, in fact, it's the theme of something going from one house to another. Well, when the sun enters Scorpio on October 23rd at 1:19 p.m., as it does every year around this time of year, it just adds to that further, as it goes also from your 11th to your 12th house. So up until October 23rd, as the sun continues transiting your 11th house, well, the sun is the bringer of life. It is our life force. It is our conscious awareness. It is our sense of self. It enlivens and vivifies everything it touches. It brings life to everything it touches. So your life of networking and the social group has really been enlivened by the sun also up until October 23rd this month. Like, that is really a big part of your focus, if not perhaps even the main focus, or at the very least one of your main focuses, I would say. But then on October 23rd, when the sun enters your 12th house, as it goes into Scorpio, now what is given great life is your private world, your world of solitude, private matters, your life, or the area of your life perhaps having to do with empathy and service and maybe even sacrifice. But also, I would say, again, dreams and imagination. So these areas, as we've basically already been over just with other objects in the sky, will be lit up at this time. And again, that's October 23rd. The sun moves into your 12th house and stays there for the rest of the month and well into November. On October 27th at 11:38 p.m., we have the new moon in Scorpio in your 12th house opposite Uranus. So here we are now again with the next lunar cycle. So a new moon in your 12th house is new beginnings surrounding, again, 12th house, solitude and contemplation, reflection on the past, and that sort of thing. So you can expect that energy to begin building at that time and stretching into the entire next lunar cycle. Now, what's interesting about this new moon, however, is that it's opposite Uranus, as I mentioned. Sudden, shocking, unexpected, crazy Uranus. The planet of sudden insights and sudden revelations, the planet of genius. The weird planet, the unique planet. The planet where things just don't make sense. The planet of sudden, shocking developments. So, how do I interpret this? I say, well, the new moon is already a time where new things begin happening. Uranus is the bolt of lightning. Uranus is the sudden new beginning. So I think this new moon is significantly amped up with that energy of newness, of the new beginning. I think this new moon is going to come in like a bolt of lightning. I think that for many people, this new moon is going to have an event that is sudden and shocking and unexpected, or any or all of the above. And this sudden, shocking event then facilitates a new beginning. And for you, Sagittarius, again, it's surrounding your 12th house matters, involving the part of your life that is about solitude, that is about being alone, that is about reflecting on the past, and that sort of thing. It's very interesting indeed. It's going to be fascinating to see specifically how that new moon plays out in people's lives. I would also say it could be very likely that Uranian energy of that new moon, October 27th, will really manifest at the time of the next full moon in November. But we'll talk more about that next month. On October 30th at 6:04 p.m., we have a Mercury-Venus conjunction in Scorpio. That is your 12th house. So when these two get together, Mercury, the planet of the mind, and Venus, the planet of love and harmony, it's all about let's talk things out. Let's work together. Let's reconcile our differences through coming to an understanding. Let's communicate and come to a very intellectual understanding of things so that we can then restore love and harmony. Let's work together and communicate about things that maybe we previously were not getting along on. That's a Mercury-Venus conjunction. It can also just plain be a love of communicating. And I would also say from my own personal experience that sometimes perhaps, well, one of my theories anyway, is that a Mercury-Venus conjunction can be a breakthrough in the area of perhaps something technological and or something that we enjoy, Venus, like a material possession that we really love, like a breakthrough in that area. And that's maybe going out on a limb a little bit, but I've seen that happen in my own just recently. And it's interesting to note that Mercury is connected to the planet Uranus that we were just talking about, and Uranus is also about breakthroughs. So perhaps we will see some breakthroughs as well on October 30th. And that would apply to everyone, by the way. But what applies to you specifically, Sagittarius, is that, again, this Mercury-Venus conjunction is in your 12th house. And so, as we've already been over a million times in this video, your 12th house of solitude, aloneness, reflection, service, empathy, dreaming and imagination, all of that stuff. There's going to be some significant undertones of that area of your life around this time. And it's fascinating because it's Mercury, the planet of communication, but it's also your 12th house. And even Venus, the planet of love and harmony and socialization. So maybe you're going to find somehow some kind of unusual, I don't even know how to describe what I'm thinking, almost like a highly anomalous event where there is suddenly some light or some communication that would not normally be there, but that is brought there to that part of your life that's about being alone. So suddenly, like, you're used to being in solitude, and suddenly some kind of communication or social interaction comes crashing into a part of your life that you're normally alone with, or where you're normally in solitude. So that would be one very strong theory of mine, I do think. Oh, I forgot to mention this earlier. With Mercury in your 12th house, it can also be a time where you're far less likely to speak up about things, but instead you're just kind of thinking about things and keeping them to yourself. And then eventually when Mercury enters your first house, which won't happen until some point after this month, then that's when you decide to speak up. But yeah, that's another key thing with Mercury in the 12th that I forgot to mention is you tend to want to keep things to yourself much more because, again, Mercury communication, 12th house, solitude, and inner world, inner contemplation or reflection, that sort of thing. All right, so the last thing I have for you here is just a bit more information on the Mercury retrograde, which is that On October 31st at 11:41 a.m., Halloween Day, Mercury officially stations retrograde in Scorpio, and that is yet again in your 12th house. So this is the point where, again, Mercury reaches the end of the first pendulum swing, and then it slowly starts to appear to move backwards in the sky. Obviously, it's not literally moving backwards, it just appears to move backwards from Earth's perspective. So this is when that Mercury retrograde activity in your 12th house will just further intensify. And again, Mercury in your 12th house is all about your mind turning inward and reflecting, contemplating, not speaking up about things perhaps the way you normally would, as already mentioned, that sort of thing. Expect that to just perhaps intensify a bit further. And it's interesting that it's literally happening precisely on Halloween Day. So should make for an interesting Halloween this year, having Mercury go retrograde that very day. And what's also fascinating about that, and I haven't actually said this to any of the other signs thus far, this just came to me just now, is that, because Mercury goes retrograde exactly on Halloween, so it's going like, it's starting here, this is Halloween, and then it's going like this, and then like this again. When it reaches the point at which it originally turned retrograde, a number of weeks down the road, we may see some kind of weird return to that Halloween energy, because that's exactly how it works. So, I guess we can talk about that either next month or maybe the following month in December. But yeah, when Mercury reaches the point at which it turned retrograde, it might almost be like, in some way, shape, or form, probably in a subtle way, because most people are not aware of astrology and will not be expecting this, but in a subtle way, perhaps we will re-experience a Halloween. There'll be like a second Halloween this year, perhaps, at least in theory. So anyway, that's it, Sagittarius. That's all I've got for you for astrology. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a magnificent October and happy Halloween. And if you enjoyed this video, which I hope that you did, feel free to subscribe if you're not already. I do indeed plan on returning very soon with more astrology and tarot related content, astrology and tarot forecasts. So I do hope you will join me for those. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.